dance around the pot, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Indeed it is. Here we go. It is showtime. It's on the Ledger Ontario Politics Podcast. Dave Trafford back with you. In fact, we are all back. And just before we start, I want to point out, I did a little bit of digging on this. This podcast is the longest running Ontario politics podcast. It all started, it all started with a conversation over coffee. And I'm sure just some, whether or not we were overly ambitious or not, we thought we could do it. And it was the campaign that kicked off in 2018. And John Wright and I looked at each other and said, do you think we should do a podcast? Yeah, let's do a podcast. Let's do a daily podcast. We did a daily podcast. And by the end of the campaign said, who the hell wants to do a daily podcast? But here we are. We're still here. John Wright is that.
So it was the two of you.
Just
the two of you were the OG.
That's it. You're right. John Wright is here at the table. Keith Leslie was an early joiner that summer in 2018. You see and hear him on CHTV and spent a good deal of time as the CP bureau chief at Queen's Park. Former leader of the Ontario PC Party, the Honourable Tim Hudak. What 20 years you were in the legislature, give or take?
There you go. Excellent. 21 years to be exact, but you're pretty much on the money. And now that I'm the late joiner of this, I'm like the secondary. Is that too dated?
and she served as Ontario's 25th Premier, the Honourable Kathleen Wynne. And, you and I were chatting earlier, and it sounded like you had a good summer with the grandkids at the lake and enjoyed the good weather.
Beautiful. It was wonderful. And I was 19 years in the legislature,
There you go. So we're still catching up. All good. So there's a few things I want to do. I know everybody's champing at the bit, or is it chomping at the bit, whatever the phrase is, to get into some of the detail and the big issues, and there's no shortage of stuff to talk about. But considering we've been off for a while, I want to reset the table and talk about a few things, just where the parties are, because there's a lot that happened in terms of the dynamics around the parties, and we're still 11 or 12 days out from the legislature getting back to business. So we'll spend some time talking about that. Also want to note the career of Jim Bradley and the passing of Jim Bradley last month, because we haven't had a chance to talk about that. And I'm really curious I know, he's his reputation, but curious to get your insights into that. But before we do any of that, indulge me, because I want to do a bit of a boast on behalf of my team at Story Studio Network. I'm watching the Blue Jays last night, and just as the seventh inning wraps up, I look at my email, and I found out that The Arctic Edge, one of the podcasts that we have produced lately, won 3 Platinum Marcom Awards. These are marketing awards for content, and specifically for the podcast in this case. So it won the Platinum Award for Outstanding Podcast Production, the Platinum Award for Web Element, i.e. the podcast, and the Platinum Award for an Educational Podcast Series. So congratulations to the SSN team.
Congratulations.
And thanks to the hard work and passion for the folks at GPA, the Global Public Affairs, and Agnico Eagle are the folks who really are pushing that story. So if you get a chance, check it out. It's the Arctic Edge, wherever you find and listen to the podcast. In fact, wherever you find and listen to this podcast. And the cool part about it, I am right now, today, I'm going to do the first recording for the Inuktitut version of the Arctic Edge.
Wow,
interesting.
Yeah, so we're all quite excited about that.
It's very good, Dave. I haven't listened to all the episodes, but I've listened to a few of them. It's very good, and it's really timely given what's going on in the country and all the conversation about the North and defense and relationships with Indigenous people. So kudos to you guys for doing it.
Yeah,
wonderful.
and Hannah Thibodeau is our host on that show. So it's a really good team and a good effort. So we're quite excited about that. I've had a lot of career moments, but and highlights that are memorable, and that would be one of them. So here we go. One of the things that we don't want to ignore or actually sort of gloss over or not talk about was the passing last month, September 26th, of Jim Bradley. He died in St. Catharines. 55 years. I know you guys, 21, 19 years in the legislature, rookies compared to what Jim Bradley did. 55 years in elected office. First elected to St. Catharines City Council in 1970. He was only 25 years old. And he made an appearance on the agenda with Steve Paikin. And that was back on June the 14th, 2018. It was a week after the Doug Ford team had won their first mandate. And the question on the table, as it might be today, is what's going on with the Liberal Party?
The all-time MPP time spent in office at Queen's Park is Harry Nixon, who served from 1919 to 1961. That's 42 years and 2 days. Jim Bradley is in second place from 1977, the 9th of June, you just passed the anniversary, until 2018, which gives his tenure 40 years, 11 months, 29 days. Farquhar Oliver in third. Mr. Bradley, you know that had you won this election and served 13 more months, you'd have been the longest serving member ever. And I want to know how disappointed you are that you're not going to be now.
Well, no one will ever believe me when I say it. That I never thought that was a great accomplishment. And I honestly did not want to go ahead of Mr. Nixon. I would have been happy to win the election, but I talked to Bob Nixon just earlier this week.
This is Harry's son.
Yes, and I said, you know what? One good thing about it was your father remains as the longest serving member, and deservedly so, because he played a much more significant role in Ontario politics than I would have played. So there wasn't a great...
overly modest of you to say.
But there wasn't, everyone thought that. And even as I say it today, they'll say, well, he's just saying that. No, that was not a consideration for me. The only time I would know about it is when there was a tweet coming from a fellow by the name of Steve Paikin.
So a good deal of humility there on the part of Jim Bradley, and when he passed away, he was I guess he was the regional chair in Niagara, in your neck of the woods. Tim, just give me a sense of that, because one of the things we often talk about here is how difficult it is in terms of bipartisanship, et cetera. But he was sort of the guy that, for me anyway, in my own experience from stepping back, was sort of the cross the aisle guy more than most would have been outwardly, and really set a good example for that in the legislature.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true, Dave. I can't believe he's gone. I mean, what a legend that was in our midst. And Kathleen and I, very fortunate to serve with him. He's honorable in the true sense of the word, not just by his elected office or appointment to cabinet, but truly honorable in the way he conducted himself in the legislature in the Niagara region. And as a member of government, he could, do the cut and thrust of debate with the best of them, very clever in sort of his retorts, and he'd stand on his feet in question period. But he never crossed the line. He never undercut. He never went personal. He built bridges. And I think that kind of work showed his success both in government and in opposition, but most importantly, in those 41 years, Dave, like surviving 3 sweeps, right? The Davis sweep, the Harris sweep, the Ray sweep. He persevered because of that honorable conduct. The other thing I'll say, he always put the riding first. I don't think there's an infrastructure project in Niagara that didn't have Jim Bradley's hand in its success, whatever side of the house he was on. His legacy lives on, the blue box programs, anti-pollution measures, controlling the smokestacks. So both locally and provincially, a lasting legacy. You see at school, too, I always thought about this, and I had the pleasure of working with Jim for, almost half of those years, I guess, but also his neighbors. And there's a Bradley school. When you work with his staff, they treated you equally across the table, no matter where you came from, what party you were part of, respectful. They were thoughtful and deep, and they played the long game. And you can see that Jim's staff have done very well in their career success as a result of graduating from the Bradley School. And my last comment, and I'm sure all of us have stories, he was just delightfully old school, right? Delightfully old school that shows the old school still works. Remember his BlackBerry he'd taken out of his pocket, which is a bunch of folded up papers of speaking notes or who to call back. I used to love talking to him late at night in the legislature for night sittings about the House was before Premier Wynne and I arrived, a pre-camera era where there's a lot more collegiality in getting things done across the aisle. I mean, what an impact he's had, and God, will miss him.
Kathleen?
That sheaf of papers was a running to-do list. So he would have, and his writing, I don't know if you remember his penmanship, tiny, precise writing. And he would have a long to-do list, and then he'd cross it off and he'd flip that page over, and then he'd start the new to-do list. It was just phenomenal. And I followed him in transportation. He was the Minister of Transportation until 2010, and then Dalton McGuinty shifted me into transportation. And I went to go into my office in the McDonald block, and I couldn't get into my office in the McDonald block because the boxes of newspaper clippings and memorabilia, he remembered everything, he kept everything. And at his memorial service, which was just a gathering of loving people, whether it was the community people who really were his family, or his staffers who were loyal. He gave a big dinner for them once a year, and the Bradley boys, I guess they were Bradley boys at the beginning, but his staff were loyal right through to the end. But it was really a loving event. And Sandra, so across the business about across the aisle and being his own person, Sandra Pupatello did the eulogy. And they worked together for years, obviously, and she was hilarious. But one of the things she talked about was, his independent mindedness, and how, he didn't always follow the leader in everything. And so she talked about his signs, which sometimes had liberal on them, sometimes didn't. Sometimes had the leader's name, sometimes didn't, but they were always red. So he was a fine man. It was a privilege to work with him. And, to Tim's point about in the legislature, I mean, he would pull out one of those clippings. He'd pull out public power and wave it in Howard Hampton's face, or he'd pull out the picture of John O'Toole flipping the bird in the legislature, and just wait for the speaker to tell him no props, and and so, like he didn't know the rule. But he was the dean of the legislature. He was wise. And I remember when I first came in 2003, watching how he held himself in caucus, and listening to his advice was a really important part of my learning. So he's going to be deeply missed. And that was the feeling from the hundreds of people who were at the memorial service.
Yeah, Keith, it's funny, you and your experience for such a long time in the press gallery, you get to see a different side of all of these folks than we get to see on this side of the media, even from the newsroom or the analysis that goes on often. But I really got the impression that whether it was cross party or whether it was across the gallery, Jim Bradley, was deeply rooted and earned that name, the label, the Dean of the Legislature.
Dean of the Legislature, the King of St. Catharines was another nickname for him. I first met him in 1984. I went to the legislature in 1984. The Liberals were in opposition at the time, and most of them had no idea. I was with Broadcast News, the broadcast division of the Canadian Press. Most of the members of the provincial parliament had no idea what I did for a living. They would see me standing in the scrums with my microphone, but they didn't know what happened after that. Jim Bradley knew. He came down my first week. We were in the front spire, the turrets. He came down the spiral staircase to my office, and he introduced himself to me. And he said, the St. Catharines radio station needs to hear from me at least once a week. And he knew I would be the turret to which those clips would be provided. I swear, even when I went back in the 2000s, or 99, people had no idea what Broadcast News was providing, that they could get to their local radio station. Jim Bradley never forgot. You talked about his behavior in the House. One of my favorite things with him was whenever Howard Hampton or the next NDP leader would stand up, he would wait because he sat near the speaker. He was in the front row, and he'd wait till the speaker's head would turn, and he'd flip up the Ray Days book and he'd just put it back down. That was his kind of thing. Later on, as I say, when I went back, and then the Liberals won election again, and McGuinty put him into cabinet. He was a very cordial guy. He really understood the media. He talked really well with me. He was a terrific guy. But in the 2010s, once he got back to environment, where he really, I think, was the most comfortable, and he'd been a really change agent and the first environment minister that really made change in Ontario in the 80s. So he was back there in that position. And he would always have this gaggle of young people around him, these Bradley boys, whatever. And they were all really, really smart. And he would see me in the legislature. This is, in the 2010s. And he would go, Keith Leslie, you're the dean of the press gallery. Then he'd look at me and say, and you still haven't asked the right question. And then he'd walk away. It's so much respect for that man. And I knew a lot of reporters would share one of his season's tickets to the Sabres games. He was that kind of guy. And there was no politics discussed at the game. It was about the Sabres. It was about going to the hockey game. He was just one of a kind in so many ways. I was so glad we got to see him in June at the 40th anniversary for the David Peterson government. Mm-hmm. He was just his same self. He looked almost the same. He was a little bit rumpled as he always was. And I remember talking to him, his driver one time when he was a cabinet minister in the 2010s. And he said, because I said, the hours are crazy. And he says, well, Jim doesn't eat at those rubber chicken dinners and all that stuff. We go to the drive-through at midnight. He put everything into his politics. And at the end of the day, he was, and I know Sandra Pupatello joked in her remembrance at the ceremony about how he would never go near a vegetable. And I was afraid that exercise would dislodge some of the plaque that's holding him together. He was a unique individual. Shock to the system. But he was true to himself all the time. And that working across the aisle, working with the other parties, I think that came from the more collegial pre-camera in the legislature times that he spoke about. But he held that through to the very end. And to see him get defeated in 2018 when Kathleen Wynne got defeated as well, later that year, he's chairman of the Niagara Regional Council. I mean, boom, okay. You don't keep a good man down, even although most of us would have considered, well, I've had a great run, I'll pack. No. He was committed to doing this, and politics was his life. And as I say, he was very unique. And as everyone else has said, he will be missed.
Yeah, 55 years in elected office, John. And, it's so easy for the folks in the media, or just the general public, to cast aspersions on people who are in politics. But oh my, I mean, considering the commitment and what it means to be, that long in public service, that's remarkable.
It is. And I don't want to demean anybody in this era, but it did come from a different era. I mean, we're talking about, there was recently a reunion for Sean Conway in the Ottawa Valley. And David Peterson showed up, and Jim Phillips was there, and a whole gaggle of others, including Sandra Pupatello. And I remember that group as a parliamentary intern at Queen's Park. And it was just a different time, a different mood. I remember Jim Bradley vividly as someone congenial, cooperative, funny, took his job seriously and went through, all the things that he had to do, but was also somebody who intellectually got it. And secondly, was able to manage people and manage their expectations. So when I look at that era and I look at Bob Welsh is another one who was absolutely consummate at the time. It was a different type of politician dealing with different types of issues. I was reflecting on it just even coming to this podcast today. If you try to prepare for this, the wall of sound that we have today, the issues that are in our face and in our ears on a constant basis was not the case back then. But Jim Bradley realized that the buck stopped at the front door of every constituent, not his, but every constituent. And so it was evident when he was in the legislature or as a minister or anywhere else that when he went home on the weekend or drove during the week back to the riding, those were the most important people in his life. And that showed a commitment which was selfless. And, it wasn't a surprise that he continued on in other roles after he left the legislature.
Yes, and I think it's just generally thought that not only will he be missed, but that the quality of that character you all described is really what's going to be missed. So
absolutely.
A lot has gone on with the major parties over the last 3 months. And when last we spoke, we were talking about the very topic that Steve Paikin was talking to Jim Bradley about, and specifically what was going to happen vis-a-vis the Liberals. And in this case, in our case, this was post-election, and Bonnie Crombie lost her seat, et cetera. They were anticipating and preparing for the leadership review, which was going to happen and did happen last month. And, it's one of those things, Kathleen Wynne, I know you were front and center in terms of making sure you were paying close attention to what was going on there. Give me a sense of what this is going to mean for the Ontario Liberals through this mandate, because at this point, the way it's shaping up, I think it's unlikely that a sitting MPP is going to be the next leader. I'm not suggesting that's impossible, but they really do appear to be broadening their peripheral vision in terms of who they may or may not want as a leader, and how they're going to go about that. Give me your best crystal ball path for the next few years, maybe, for this party.
Well, my crystal ball says we have no freaking idea.
Yeah.
I think that we can say we don't think it's going to be this or that, but I just don't think we know, Dave. There are some very impressive people in the caucus who are thinking about running. And yes, there are some impressive people outside of the caucus. But I think what's interesting is there are a number of people lining up to run for this leadership. I was at another one of the events for David Peterson's 40th just a couple of nights ago. And, he was saying, Steve Paikin was interviewing him, and he was saying he had spoken to 4 people at that gathering who all were thinking about running for the leadership. So look, I think that we don't know yet. I've certainly had conversations with a lot of people who are thinking about it. I am really happy that there are people from the next generation who are stepping up, who are interested. There's a vitality and a youthful face to the people who are thinking about running. So I'm pretty optimistic about it. My own personal feeling is that I hope it doesn't take too long. Our leadership was 3 months. I'm not suggesting that it can be that short, but I hope it doesn't drag on too long, because to your point about what's going to happen in the legislature, I think that, the Liberals need time and the new leader will need time to establish himself, herself in the minds of the people of Ontario, whether he or she is in the legislature or not. And so I hope that the party gives that new leader the time to do that. But I think people are at the same time dismayed at what happened at the AGM, and also kind of energized by the possibilities that we're seeing now. That's how I'm seeing it.
John, I don't want to sort of relitigate what happened with Crombie, et cetera. I think that's done, and their party's prepared to move on. But one of the things that does occur to me is, on the one hand, the resilience of the Liberal brand is pretty extraordinary, considering what it's been through since 2018, and that it still has this momentum, such as it is, moving forward. And to some degree, there are people lining up of some significance who do want the job to lead it. But what, if we're talking about brand vis-a-vis the expectation of the consumer, what does the Ontario voter expect from the Liberal Party these days?
Wow, what a great question. I don't think at the moment people are really focused on the Ontario brand that much. It's the Mark Carney brand, it's the federal Liberal brand, which people gravitate towards because of the issues and also because of the different leadership styles. I think, it's hard to say where the actual brand goes, except that it depends on the person who's leading it. It oftentimes is, so personality driven. And I'm not sure, we can project out what the policy aspects of the Liberal Party would be vis-a-vis the NDP, because they oftentimes appear on the same page or pretty close to it. So I don't think there's any expectations at the moment in terms of, the Liberals filling some kind of gap. I think it's really, really important that the Liberals look to a leader who distinguishes themselves as a peer in many ways to to the Premier, who can, go toe to toe with the Premier, but has a connection to people that seems less of a self-serving mode as some politicians have, and more of a policy development over the next couple of years that are going to touch different parts of the province that are beyond simply where they're elected. And I think, again, this goes back to what I said at the outset. The Liberal brand before with Jim Bradley stretched very differently. Today, especially given the Ford circumstance in power, it's fragmented, and it's got to come together in such a way that a leader, and I would believe that there is even one in caucus. I always think of John Fraser. Now, he's always said that he's not interested in the job, but I think of someone of that stature, leading the Liberal Party. I think the personality, I think the focus of the individual, I think the sense of what a phrase that we always use here nowadays, and that is the adult in the room. I think that's what people are going to be looking for, especially given what we are going to be facing ahead over the next 2 years, given with the Trump administration south of the border.
Tim, when we look at this from, just the pure politics of it, but also the governing side of things, it as giddy as Tories may be about their premier's position in the polls, and you can't argue. I mean, he seems to be ringing all the bells. It's good for governing when you've got strong opposition. And so, if the Liberals don't get this right in terms of a leader, overall, isn't that bad for the system?
Oh, sure. I'm more optimistic than that for the Ontario Liberal Party. Let me just say something about Bonnie Crombie too, because often, political pundits seem to think that our job after battle is to walk down the hill and shoot the wounded. And, she accomplished a lot for the Ontario Liberal Party. There's a lesson here that, while timing isn't everything in politics, it certainly is a majority shareholder of your fate in the business. And she really only had a year and a month as leader of the party, because when the Liberals nominated Bonnie Crombie, who I thought had tremendous appeal to the broader public and a lot of experience, nobody knew about the Trump and the Doug Ford steamroller. I think that would have run anybody over, save Hazel McCallion descending from the heavens and signing up for the Liberal Party, right? Like, that was unavoidable. And she did a hell of a lot. I know Premier Wynne's talked about this in terms of fundraising, building structure in the party. They're now an official party and all the resources that commands. So fate was cruel to Leader Crombie, but she got the party a good distance, being ready to win the next time around. To your question, Dave, so there is just an inertia in politics, a 7 to 10 year itch where it's a lesson that Justin Trudeau didn't learn and stayed too long. Harper was defeated. Chrétien left at that point in time. Mulroney with Campbell defeated. That people just tire. So far, Doug Ford has defied gravity. He's broken that rule, but eventually that will change. So to your question, what do I think the Liberal Party needs? We don't know if it'll be right or left shift, but I would think, number one, a strong work ethic to keep building on the positive change in Bonnie Crombie brought an organization. You need to be a really strong fundraiser. The PC ads attacking Crombie did have a significant impact on her brand before she could get out of the gate. And third and finally, you're going to need a leader, I think, to John's point, that people see that have the chops to run the province. So that inertia eventually works against the PCs after being in office for 12 years, right? Does the next person on the stage look like they're ready to lead?
Well, we'll get into the lifespan of the Tories in a minute, but Keith, this is the challenge, and I think if nothing else, what speaks to resilience is that the party has done this well without a leader in the legislature since 2018. So you're trying to find the find the good stuff in that story, but there is some resilience there.
Well, the Liberal brand is still relatively strong in that it's across the province. They got more votes than the official opposition. They just didn't, the seat count didn't go. But that shows that the Liberal brand is big right across Ontario. There's still a core there to be built on. I want to pick up on something Premier Wynne said, which is about the generational change. I think that's particularly important this time in a leader. Whether it's someone like a Karina Gould who's coming in, just someone young, the next generation, that someone can say, that's someone who could spend the next 3-4 years in opposition before they become government and be comfortable with it. That's not an easy task. Someone to win the leadership and know that they're going to face at least 2.5, maybe 3.5 years in opposition at this point. Because Ford, 52, 53%, it's because the Liberals don't have a leader and the NDP aren't an effective opposition. They're actually falling in the polls at this point. So the opportunities are there for the Liberals if they get the right leader. I also think there's a large part of that. The Liberals have, I think, in voters' minds, a bit of an identity crisis in that we don't know specifically what they stand for because it does tend to be very focused on what the leader's principles and ideas are. So there's some core Liberal values, but are they shared by all Liberals? We're not really clear. So we need someone who's going to expand on their values and let people know what they are, and that they're ones that people want to see in a government, not necessarily in an opposition party. But as I say, I think the timing, we talked about timing being, terrible for Bonnie Crombie. I think it's actually good for the next Liberal leader because of the falling in the NDP, and their stature both provincially and federally is falling. Mark Carney is lifting the Liberals federally, and I think that's going to help the next Liberal leader provincially as well. So I think the timing, the opportunities are there for the Liberals if, and it's of course a huge if they pick the right leader.
John Wright, while Bonnie Crombie was, undergoing the scrutiny at the AGM in September, Marit Stiles had a review of her own. She passed. I mean, I think some qualified it as being on sort of life support after the vote came out, but kind of got through the Clark 66%, which was fine, and she's still on the job. To the point that Keith was making about, the core values for the Liberal Party, it's interesting to see that there was a significant shakeup in terms of people in her office, Marit Stiles, that is, and the people around her and so on. So there seems to be some acknowledgement that we need to do other things. But if they begin to lean more into what, is qualified, and I hate the phrase, is sort of this identity politics, I'm just not sure that is what, back to the question, Ontario voters expect of the next government.
I want to go back to a couple of things that I said earlier, and the personality defining the party, because at the end of the day, that's what it ends up being, where people look at the party not, through the lens of who's leading it. And, the party up to this stage is center left. They're not far left. And Marit Stiles done well in terms of being on top of the issues. It's not a voice that resonates strongly amongst constituents, but it's there. I think there was and again, I don't want to get existential about this, but there was a meeting in the last couple of days that was sponsored by BMO and the Eurasia Group, and it really was a summit to deal with the United States. And I was part of the first one that was put on. Evan Solomon hosted it, and there was a particular moment that it was where the public and reporters were barred from about an hour of it. And what it was Chatham House Rules, where Howard Lutnick appeared. And with Flavio Volpe in the audience, basically said the following: your auto industry is dead. Sorry, folks, but we're going to take all those cars and we're going to manufacture them in the United States. And if you don't like it, that's too bad, but you're going to have to find another way to make money. Number two, this USMC thing, well, we'd rather do bilateral deals, and we're not going to be part of the whole structure anymore. We are, 8 months into this regime that is south of the border, the transformative border? I've just finished doing polling in 4 cities, and the anxiety level on affordability is through the roof. The concern about the Trump administration, while you can't measure it exactly on kind of a laddered basis, it's down the list in terms of top concerns. It's all interwoven with everything else. And I think, we talk about Jim Bradley, we talk about some of the previous regimes. We're not dealing with anything close to what existed before. And as I said, I don't want to get existential about this, but the administration south of the border is going to alter everything that we have, where our trade relationships are, our businesses, what government spends its money on, and all that sort of stuff. And as a result, we're going to see leadership through that lens. And that's where I'm not sure the NDP nor the Liberals at this point hold a candle to the wind. I just don't. And we may disagree with what Doug Ford says on a day-to-day basis, whether it's about Diageo or anything else. The structuring of what is about, or the restructuring of our country about to take place is going to be existential for the country. And as a result, I think it's hard to kind of project out where the NDP is or the Liberals should be with their leadership. But I do think that within the next year or two, as the leadership issues progress, that is what we are going to have to deal with. It's inevitable. And it is a complete mind shift in terms of how we've seen politics and our own well-being, since we were born. It's never been like this. So I'm not discounting optimism or opportunity, but I'm just saying that, over the next 5 to 10 years, people are going to alter their views on what is necessary for the job. And as a result, the leader becomes absolutely critical for that. And I'm not sure that the NDP are going to be there in any strength at the moment.
Well, even when we look at some of the numbers, Kathleen, vis-a-vis the NDP, they have dropped in the polling that Keith has cited since the election. Fundraising is not as robust as it had been. I mean, I think the Liberals, to Tim's point, Bonnie Crombie's done a pretty good job in terms of fundraising for a party that really needed some serious fundraising. So, that turn for the NDP at this point, I understand you want to get back to your core, you want to appeal to that base, you want to make sure that you're strong there. But if it's dwindling and diminishing, as John is suggesting, vis-a-vis what's going on nationally, internationally, boy, I think Marit Stiles might have a tougher row to hoe than the Liberals do.
Well, I think Marit Stiles has a very hard row to hoe, and I think for a number of reasons. Because of the popular vote in the last election, that she didn't beat the Liberals. The Liberals, by getting party status, are in a much better position to get themselves ready, and came second in a whole swath of ridings across the province. So they're just sitting waiting in those ridings. I was actually, to be honest, given Marit's abilities and her likability and all of the things that go into who she is, I was shocked at her 68% showing at her review. I thought she was going to do way better than that. I think the fact that she didn't, speaks to what her challenge is. I think the party is divided. I think the issues around Sarah Jama and the Middle East have created a huge problem for the NDP. And I don't think that has been healed. I also think there's an interesting thing that's going on in the federal NDP race. And, when people think about NDP right now, what we're hearing about is the federal leadership race. And some of the ideas that are coming out at the federal level they're pretty challenging in terms of people who, want a center kind of moderate government. And that is, Abby Lewis talking about, national groceries. Like, what does that look like? A nationalized grocery plan. I don't even know what that would mean. So there are lots of ideas that are going to be floating around in the NDP federal leadership that are going to kind of color the way people think about the NDP in Ontario. So I think, and she's had challenges already because of Jagmeet as the leader federally. So I think she's got a lot of challenges, and she doesn't have what the Liberals have right now, which is an aspirational process to go through. We're right now on the verge of this positive, because leadership races, while they can be divisive, there's a lot of energy in them, and they can be really a good kind of crucible for leadership to be strengthened, and also for good ideas to come forward. And the NDP doesn't have that. They're climbing out of a hole where they should be looking down at us from the top of the mountain, and they're just not. So I think she's got a lot of challenges, some of her own making and some just circumstantial.
Well, Tim, just to point out for context, to understand that the 68% might not sound like a lot, but it really is interesting to note that was the first time the NDP actually voted for her in a leadership capacity, because nobody wanted the job. She was the only person on the ballot when it came to leading the party at this point, following Andrea Horwath. So that's some context for that number. But the other part of this is, and I go back to Horwath, and since 2018, and I realize COVID snarled everything, but that's a hell of a lot of runway not to have momentum by now as the official opposition at Queen's Park.
Exactly.
Yeah, so here's my diagnosis, or whatever it's worth, both for Marit Stiles and for the New Democrats in Ontario. And one of the fun parts of being a council public affairs, and some of my time at OREA before that, is now, Dave, I can venture outside the blue tent from time to time and visit other neighborhoods. And so that's important in two respects. Number one, councils across Canada, and recently the new Democrat leader from Saskatchewan was in Toronto. So we hosted a reception for her, connected her with, leaders in the Toronto area across unions, businesses, and thinkers. Something that I had a chance to do when I was PC leader. It was always a great experience. And when I was listening to the new Democrat leader from Saskatchewan, she sounded much different than the Democrat leader in the province of Ontario. And when I see, new Democrat governments or parties in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta to an extent, in BC, they seem so much more centered and ready to govern. Ontario is off of that axis. And I think that leads me to my next point is they need to make a decision, right? Are they going to be the ones that are going to be driving issues in ideological, or do they actually want to become government again someday? And in talking to some folks involved in the Democratic Party, when I venture outside of my blue tent, they feel that the leader and the leader's office have not been listening enough to the grassroots, particularly from the traditional New Democrat side, the blue collar worker, fight for the little guys, stand up against authority, as opposed to the identity politics set. The leader now, Marit Stiles, has tossed some bodies to the Sharks, right? Going to move on. She has tremendous communication ability. I think she's eminently likable, very energetic, but I think she needs to move her party more towards what we see in the Western New Democrats than where they've been.
Yeah, it's interesting, Keith, when we start to talk about how, the provincial party affected by the federal party, we haven't talked about how the provincial party in Ontario should be or could be taking a page out of the other provincial parties. And, Wab Kinew has been, next to Doug Ford, he looks like a conservative at times, but very much in terms of, the NDP brand in Manitoba is different than it is in Ontario. And I think that's a challenge just generally for the New Democrats.
Well, the challenge is, can we trust them to run government? And a national groceries program? I mean, no. This is exactly the kind of thing that people fear with the new Democratic government, that these wild socialist ideas. Now, I'm saying if we had a head-up vote, Avi Lewis versus Galen Weston, I don't know. But that's not what we're going to be faced with. The New Democrats need to get away, as Tim said about the identity politics. Just get away from that and have some policies that actually attract voters and that will show voters you can be government. And Tim's analogy with the Western provinces is bang on. Wab Kinew, I'd vote for that guy if I could. I mean, he's just such an impressive premier. It doesn't matter what party he's from. It does, locally, but he's just on the national stage. He's an impressive man. And on the local stage as well, you just see they're smiling at his news conferences. This is a breath of fresh air. Marit Stiles has got a hell of a challenge. And I think you're right. It started, Dave, when she had no one opposing her, when you just walked into the leadership. So there was no leadership race to energize the party, to bring the party together, or even divide it, or to get it any media attention. She just sort of woke up in the job one day, and people said, well, okay. And there were stories that she was the new NDP leader, but they didn't play anywhere. I mean, it's just she was fighting that. She's very good in the legislature. She's very good at news conferences and at speeches. But the 68%, I question what those people in the party thought when, barely 2 years ago, there was no one running for the leader. She took the job, did a pretty solid job of it. Yes, she got lower votes, but she did, retain official opposition status. What did they want from her? What did they want from a leader when there was no one else even in the job at that point? To me, it would have been much more important and smart of the party, the people and the delegates, to show as close to a unanimous vote as anything over 80% would have been really, really good for her. And good for the party. It would have showed a united party that they're not divided over the Palestinian issue, that these issues that they keep playing into, they seem to shoot themselves in the foot all the time. Get some policies that show you can be a government of Ontario and look at the other provinces. Well, what are they doing that's attracting the voters there that isn't happening for you? I mean, you're the official opposition. You have the chance to get there. But as I say, I think the next time it's the Liberals that are going to move into official opposition status. If not, if Ford and the government, if people are finally fed up, they have a much better chance, the Liberals, I think, of vaulting from third place into government than the NDP has of jumping from second or opposition into government. They're just not seen as a government in waiting at this point.
Okay, John Wright, veteran pollster. Let's just kind of dig into the numbers that we have seen since the election with here in Ontario. The premier in some polls and some days is, outpacing his popular vote in the election outcomes. So there's nothing soft about what the Tories are doing right now, although there's no shortage of hair on fire conversations, whether it's about speed cameras or speed bumps, as the case may be, or, alcohol sales here in Ontario. We talked a lot about, the brand of the NDP and the brand of the Liberals. For me, the success of the Tory party right now is that they are resonating with some of the stuff you talked about. That is to say, things like affordability and uncertainty in the future. Whether you subscribe to the bluster or you want to call it performative on the part of the Premier, I don't, right now, I don't think that matters. The brand is incredibly strong and is reflected in those polls.
Yeah, and there's no shortage of polls in order to justify that. I mean, in the old days, you might have said, well, there's a poll coming out, 2 months from now, let's see what it looks like. It's a constant stream. And they're all credible firms. And so you can see the popularity of the Premier, despite all the things that we could talk about on this podcast, about whether the Auditor General's report or healthcare or skills training issues, like all those things. There's a few things that I always take into account. First of all, what we listen to in downtown Toronto or in some of the other larger centers does not reflect what the rest of the population feels or thinks about things. In other words, when he's talking about speed cameras in downtown Toronto, and the public is on side with him when it comes to, that it's a revenue grab, but offside when it comes to, we should remove them all, especially from, even school zones. It's just not playing outside of Toronto. I mean, it's irrelevant. And the other issues have taken over top of that. So when you only need 37% in the province of Ontario with the party structure that we have to become the premier of this province, when you're tracking in at 50% to 55% in terms of popularity and vote, it's a steamroller. There just is nothing there that stops you from doing that. Secondly, the premier has established his bona fides when it comes to defending the province with respect to what's going on south of the border. And you just can't underestimate that. That's a resonance which goes right through the anxieties that people have, because there is no other opposition leader in this province who can stand up to it. And much to what we've just talked to now, there is no Liberal leader. The NDP voice is lightweight and controversial in some ways that alienates people. So the premier is on really good ground. I would say that the only thing that you have to watch with Doug Ford is just his personality and his ability to kind of move into character areas which are bombastic in some ways, both in demonstration and what he's saying, that leave it open for people to then take a good political shot at him. Whether he's going to pull all the Diageo off of the LCBO stands because of the bottling plant issue. I mean, that's a pretty big thing that you're proposing to do. But it leaves you open to saying, this is not the key issue of the day. And if you're going to do this to protect 200 jobs in this area, then what do you do when you lose the auto manufacturer? Like, there's a delicate dance going on when it comes to what's happening in Washington. And we've yet to see what Mark Carney can actually bring home. And maybe he can't bring home, what we all want. But for the Carney diplomacy in the Oval Office, countered by Doug Ford saying, you got to hammer him, you got to, do everything to, go hard at him. There's a juxtaposition here that probably unsettles some people. But the reality is that his personality and what he's doing is cutting through to people that are outside of the city of Toronto. He does have on many occasions between 45 and 50% support in the city of Toronto. And that is probably a combination of two things. Number one, the issues that he's touching on and the overarching nature of what concerns us. And secondly, no opposition, like none whatsoever. There's no alternative party for us to consider. So I think that, from a polling perspective, you're not going to see Doug Ford down in the polls anytime soon, because there is no alternative in the agenda that he's on. He's his own worst enemy, but that doesn't seem to be hurting him that much at all.
So Kathleen and John points out, when we talk about the premier's popularity is one thing, the party's popularity is, closely tied to that. But let's face it, how much of that is weak opposition as opposed to really, solid support for what it is the Premier's doing right now?
Well, I think that the Premier is still he's still got some of the benefit of the Captain Canada cape. I think that he donned that Captain Canada cape before Carney became the Prime Minister. He has continued to be a strong voice standing up for Ontario. People like that. People like it when he pours out bottles of liquor and says he's going to take all the Diageo liquor off the shelves, even though that may not be what he should be doing. People like that kind of bluster. He gets top marks for politics. There's no question about that. I think, and we're going to talk as the legislature comes back, we're going to talk about some of the substantive issues that are really a problem in this province. In terms of good marks for politics, terrible marks for policy, a total failing grade for policy as far as I'm concerned, whether you talk about healthcare or education or, childcare, all of the issues that have been a problem for him. The latest Auditor General's report, we're gonna go into that. But the bottom line for me is that the economy is in real trouble in certain parts of the province, and Doug Ford can pour, scotch on was it scotch whiskey, whatever it was, on the ground all he likes. But if people don't feel that they can look after themselves and their families, and the Windsor unemployment rate, I think, is 11% right now. And so there's another 2.5, 3 years in this mandate for this Premier. And if those things don't shift, it's going to be really challenging for him to distract people by these bright, shiny objects like, speed cameras for another 3 years. That is really going to be a challenge. And, quite frankly, what goes on in the legislature, and I know that people don't watch the legislature, but it is up to the opposition and civil society to hold this government's feet to the fire on all the things that they are not doing, because the economy is hurting people and the decisions they're making are not decisions that are actually helping people. He has the "for the people" sign, but you always have to ask with Doug Ford, for which people? Which people are you helping? Who is it that you are actually helping? And that answer is often not the people who he purports to be helping. So that's going to come to roost at some point. And I think that depending on what the economy does over the next little while, Doug Ford is not in charge of the relationship with the United States now. That cape, while he's still benefiting from having worn it for a while, that cape is firmly on Mark Carney's shoulders now. And so Doug Ford's going to have to, at some point very soon, get down to the business of seriously governing Ontario and using evidence sometimes to make his decisions. Because right now we've been an evidence-free zone in Ontario for years, and that has meant that there have been bad policy decisions. So I think that's kind of what he's facing when he goes into the legislature. And quite honestly, I'll just end on this. I don't think that this government actually knows what they stand for. I mean, I sat in the legislature with them for 4 years. The first 2 years, that was very clear. They didn't know what they were there to do except tear down the stuff that we had done and then replace most of it, as they went through their term. But now, with COVID having, receded, even though I know some of the impacts are not over, and the relationship with the United States changing, I think his agenda is very thin, and he's going to have to they're going to have to do some hard work to lay out a plan that's going to make sense to people.
Keith, when all of what Kathleen just said is in the moment. I mean, this is where people are and, projected forward. But for me, as I observe how people are living their lives, the polls are to some degree a lagging indicator. So we're still thinking of Doug, 6 months ago, as opposed to where we are now. A buddy of mine I play hockey with is an executive at Unifor, and there's not a chance he's ever going to vote for Doug Ford. But when you heard Ford in front of the uniform members talking about auto workers, he was speaking their language. So that's his secret sauce right now, and he's ringing those bells.
Absolutely. He's already divided the unionized movement, the labor union movement. I mean, the public sector unions, they wanted nothing to do with him, basically. But the private sector unions, because he's building, spending so much, they're all on side with this. So this is just great ground for Ford Nation to cover. I won't even call it the progressive conservative government. This is literally Ford Nation. And we see it with the populism of this guy, the pouring the whiskey out under the ground. I mean, it's such a simple stunt. And yet it led every TV newscast, him doing that. It got home. Doug Ford was on CNN yesterday talking. So he hasn't taken the Captain Kane of the Cape completely. I mean, he's letting Carney take the lead, but he's still out there fighting and doing his thing. And Canadians, Ontarians see him doing that. The strength of his populism, though, really struck me at that event at Chapman's Ice Cream, where he, not only professed his love and he eats their ice cream bar every night, cracks one open and starts eating. Okay, ask your questions. And I thought, okay, he's going to take a bite and put it aside. No, he continued to eat that entire ice cream bar while taking reporters' questions. If you think of how that went over versus how Pierre Poilievre eating the apple went over while taking reporters, it was just a complete 180. Poilievre looked just evil and condescending and mean and no one you'd ever really want to have a beer with or vote for. Whereas Doug Ford looked like the guy who gets it. He looked like a guy who says, yeah, I know my doctor says I shouldn't be eating. He's the same as the police say, don't, speed too far. No, I'm a regular guy. I've got this. I know the doctor says I shouldn't do this, but I'm still going to eat this ice cream bar. I know the police and the school board say that, they need the safety cameras, the speed cameras in the school zones. Well, I think that, it's just personal feeling with him. Premier Wynne said there's no evidence here. No, the evidence is that they actually do save lives and they slow people down. You can add the speed bumps in if you want. But a lot of the schools are on, Mayor Chow pointed out, they're on arterial roads. You can't put speed bumps on arterial roads, have fire trucks trying to speed down. I mean, all of this, it's just done on Doug Ford's whims. But Doug Ford's whims and seemingly back of the napkin policy stuff seems to keep them over, like their support has increased since the election. He's over 50% in most of the times, let alone getting more votes in each of 3 elections. That's just not done. So they're going to have to be held account when the legislature gets back. Hopefully this Auditor General's report, especially, there was 4 Auditor General's reports in that one day, but of course the one about the Skills Development Fund seems to be really just Greenbelt Part 2. Why is this happening? It seems to be just the same language as used in the Auditor General's report. So this is going to be something that's going to be really difficult for them to face in the legislature. And they've been out of the House so long. So when they come back next week, I think we're going to see an awful lot on the Auditor General's report. And maybe Doug Ford's popularity will start to come down a little bit when he can't answer or won't answer these questions.
Tim, you alluded to sort of the lifespan of just generally of governing parties, and I agree with you in terms of there's going to be eventually a certain stink around a party, and it's just going to have to kind of die a natural death, et cetera. Having said that, and I know a lot of people have kind of poo-pooed this small group of conservatives that met at the Gardner Museum, I guess it was last week, talking about the state of conservatism in Ontario and whether or not Doug's conservative enough, et cetera. To me, it's that next step, whether or not Doug is that conservative, but it's a reset opportunity for the Tories post Ford. And who knows when that's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And I'm watching this thinking, are we into another big blue machine era where we're looking at, another 40 years of conservatives based on the way things are playing out?
Well, look, I think that the work that is done, the Conservative Party to put ideas, if they say constructive ideas on the table, the group you talked about, more on the right of the party, ideas about, fiscal restraint, a smaller, more focused role for government. That's healthy. If they adopt a tone of being anti-government, running their own party, all that garbage, that's destructive and gets you nowhere. There's no doubt that it's fascinating to watch this battle between the irresistible force of the inertia of voters getting tired of the government and wanting change, battling, Doug Ford's immovable object of his grip on his voting coalition, which seems to be strengthening. I think there's 2 reasons for that. Big picture wise, Dave, he continues to come across as the person who you want to have their hands on the wheel when there's a bumpy road ahead, particularly with our American relationship. The second part of Doug Ford's success is he has this well-honed barometer. When he's out with people on the streets and gets out of Queen's Park, or the lobbyists and consultants and all that kind of stuff, although we have a lot of good things to say, he has an uncanny ability, I think, then to hear how people conceive issues and talk about them, and then make the adjustments on the road as necessary. And that barometer so far is working. The danger, I think, is if you get caught up in Queen's Park, you unplug that barometer, you keep them away from average folks. That's where they have the most risk of going off the road.
All right. Well, we've spent a whole hour here just sort of setting the reset button, and now I think the table is set. So thanks for all of that. And I think it was a necessary conversation, particularly around Jim Bradley and where the parties are at. So next week, we'll be back. And we'll dig in on some of those things in terms of some of the issues. Certainly, there's more fodder than we can probably get to in a whole year's worth of podcasting around the Auditor General's report. But stand by. We will be getting into that, of course, and that is the first one before the legislature gets back to business at Queen's Park. So thanks to Tim Hudak, Keith Leslie, Kathleen Wynne, John Wright. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.